Hello, today we are back at Dr. Bickmore's YA Wednesday, and my guest today is Jennifer Ann Moses. And many of you may not know her, but I'm telling you, you should. And for those of you that have been longtime friends of Alan or NCTE from the beginning days, my introduction to Jennifer came from a mutual friend of ours, Jerry Weiss, who was one of the founding members of Alan way back in the 70s. And one day in the mail, I got a little note from an email and a book from Jerry and Jennifer that said, hey, Steve, you might be interested in this book. And indeed I was. It was wonderful. So you might tell us a little bit about how you came to be friends with Jerry.
Jerry, the sweetest man ever. Actually, I think it was for one of his significant birthdays. It must have been his 90th. His daughters asked if I would contribute to some booklet for him. And I wrote a whole silly book, they illustrated it, to the theme of Jerry Weiss is very nice. I'll say it once, I'll say it twice, I'll even say it 3 times thrice. Jerry Weiss is very nice. Jerry and I became friends through our synagogue here in New Jersey. That's how I met him. And when his late wife, his great love of his life, Helen, was ill and dying in the hospital, he needed rides to the hospital to see her because he was by then too elderly to drive more than a couple of blocks safely. And like many other members of our synagogue mensch squad, I signed up to drive him, and that's how I met him. And then we quickly became friends. And as you know, he died at the age of 95, so he had a good run.
Yeah, he had a great run. And even when he was elderly, when my colleagues Jackie Bach and Melanie Hundley and I were editors of the Allen Review, he would still weigh in with great advice, and sometimes we would seek out his advice about things. And about once a year, we had him still write a column that I think his daughter was helping him type up and send through the computer, because he found some of that stuff mysterious.
Right. I do too, and I'm a lot younger than he is. Like, computer.
That's right.
It's a miracle I got onto this Zoom link.
Well, I feel a little bit about that as well. I'd like to talk to you about kind of 3 areas. And the 3 areas, so that people will kind of know where we're going, is your contribution in YA literature, which I'm hoping people will delve into a little bit more, and we'll provide some links at the end of this interview. Your life as an artist, visual artist.
Mm-hmm.
And what I call the 3rd area would be your contributions as an essayist. And that may take the place in blogs or editorials in newspapers, but we'll kind of go through those 3 categories.
Okay. Are you starting with a question, or do you want me to just kind of?
Yeah, the first one is, how did you've been writing and writing, but how did you decide to write something that people would consider YA? Okay. And the 2 books that I know, best of yours that fell in that category are The Art of Dumpster Diving and the Book of Joshua. Right. And we'll talk more about those in depth. But tell me how you arrived at trying to write for young adults.
Honestly, you're not going to love this answer at all. The truth is, I thought I might have a better shot at getting published in the YA category because it was exploding at the time I started writing. And to me, I'm looking YA. YA just means it has a teenage protagonist. It's young adult, but it's a novel. I'm a fiction writer, have been a very serious fiction writer sort of from the get-go. And, I'd been writing short stories, which were being placed in literary magazines, and then 20 people would read them. And right, I thought I was more ambitious than that. I wanted books, plural. And I was living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana at the time. I raised my 3 children mainly in Baton Rouge. And my husband was then a professor at LSU. And so we lived there, and we were very embedded in the community there. And the stories in the Deep South just fall out of the sky. They're just like the story. And so I'm living in this astonishingly kind of narrative rich, I put it that way, community that that was just kind of almost throwing these treasures at me. And I just kind of picked up the treasure that was lying around on the sidewalk and started writing about people so much not like me, because I was raised in the Northeast. I was raised in a, you know, in a kind of stereotypical, if you would, ambitious, professional Jewish family. And the idea was you went to an Ivy League college and you lived somewhere between Washington, D.C. and Boston. Like that's where you could live. Maybe you could live in San Francisco, LA, you know, a little iffy, Chicago, a little bit, but we had very clear ideas about the way life, you know, what it's supposed to look like and what life is supposed to look like, and all the drama when I was a kid. Well, I mean, there was a lot of boy drama, of course, a lot of parental drama, the usual teenage dramas, but we didn't have poverty drama where I grew up in a suburb in Northern Virginia. Right. And there wasn't poverty drama at college, right? There wasn't racial drama at college. There was sort of upper middle class educated classes drama. And I moved to Louisiana, and it's just a whole different world. And sort of the misery and challenges of human life on this planet were just much more, I'm going to say, in my face, and not just in my face, but in my world. And so I absorbed that, and it eventually came out as YA. Now, that said, my first efforts at YA, I was writing primarily about Black people. And that did not go down well because I am not a Black person. I mean, that was just, you know, I wasn't going to, I could have pretended with my name Moses, you know, people might have assumed, and with my address in Baton Rouge, they may have assumed. But, you know, my agent strongly advised me, and I agree that, you know, you don't pretend to be somebody you're not. And so eventually what became my book, The Art of Dumpster Diving, which was my most recently published YA, that I originally wrote that about a Black family.
Huh?
I originally wrote about a Black family, and it was based sort of deeply, you know, around, you know, actual real people and things I'd seen in Baton Rouge. Because during the same time when I was living in Baton Rouge, I volunteered weekly for almost 10 years at a home for AIDS patients. And at the time I started volunteering there, AIDS had become, at least in the Deep South, a disease of largely impoverished and people and addicts. And in Baton Rouge, that meant largely Black people.
Yeah.
It had been like more like the patients where I volunteered had been mainly gay men, mainly white. And then the whole thing changed, and it was mainly Black people, women as well as men, because the partners of people with AIDS male and female, of course, were suspect. And so then I listened to 10 years worth of stories as I volunteered there. So these stories were just in me, and they came out in my writing. And eventually, The Art of Dumpster Diving, my agent had not been able to place it. And I rewrote it as a white working class story. I don't think it matters what color the skin is of the characters in the book, because the human dilemmas they face are the same human dilemmas. I mean, like, we all bleed red, we all have hearts, right, that break.
Yeah.
And these boys, their hearts are all breaking. And with that, my agent at the time refused to handle the book anymore. And then I placed it with Turner. But YA is a wonderful form for so many reasons, and one is for a writer, honestly, it's more of a long jog than a marathon. Going out for a long run this afternoon, but it's not going to be 26 whatever miles. So
Yeah.
it's not as scary for me embarking on YA. And also with YA, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir now. Talk about preaching to the choir. You know, teenagers, young people are so tender. Like they're just like us, but they're not, they're still full of hope. They're still like, they haven't had, I don't know what, they haven't been calloused yet. You know, whether they're jerks or not is sort of beside the point. They
Well,
haven't been calloused by life yet.
yeah, to interject a little bit about that, James, the main character in The Art of Dumpster Diving, is such a likable character who is inventive and at the same time sure of himself and terribly unsure about what he can do, right? You can read him and you think, you're a confident, capable kid, but he can be swayed by Gabriel. He can be swayed by the misfortune of his family. He can be swayed by the fact that the adults in his life have foibles and illness and weakness that he cannot solve, but he's trying to.
Right, and like all children, I mean, he's basically just a big kid. He's not an adult by any stretch. I don't know. I mean, I didn't really become an adult till I'm 40, so I think why I should stretch to about 36, but that's a side note. You know, we all grow up in a system, and some systems are more loving and healthy than others. They're almost like mini cults, you know, our family's like a mini cult. And if we happen to land in a really good one, we're fine, because our cult is about loving each other and being respectful and supporting each other in our individuality and yet being together as a family, you know. But so poor James, he loses his healthy, happy cult, his family.
Yeah.
They all die. And he's left completely unmoored. And you know, as you know, and he's responsible for his little brother Danny, and then his very bossy friend Gabriel, you know, has this great idea about how the boys are going to make it, and that's where the novel really starts. That's where the plot starts up.
Well, that's one of the things, and you know, most people who know, followed me at all, know that I was in Baton Rouge, and I was reading this the first time in Baton Rouge, you know, and thinking of, wow, this is really kind of an interesting, because all those characters felt exactly real to me, and they felt like, oh, I've been in neighborhoods where I can see these houses, I can see what they're talking about, and I can see the crawl spaces, I can see all these things underneath, and it's a really interesting look at poverty that seemed to me, as I read it, so strikingly real. And while we know that all teachers and all schools have kids that are living in poverty, sometimes we're unaware of a group of people who are living in really desperate situations.
The stress on these families is just unbelievable. You know, these kids, there's a reason these kids come out, so many of them, they can't sit down and focus in a classroom. That's not the case with James, but Danny, his little brother, goes during the book, and you understand why, because who wouldn't? Who wouldn't?
And this is, so I you know, I highly recommend this book for somebody who wants what I would call a really great local color piece about Baton Rouge, as well as a in-depth study of youth trying to live, trying to tackle poverty and redefine what that means for them, because they want to be successful, they want to be independent, and the obstacles just keep coming. It sometimes feels a little bit unfair, Jennifer, that there's that many obstacles, but I think it's still real.
That's why you have to go out and vote. But no, it's right. It's, you don't get me on a tear about, you know, the not enough taxes that the wealthy pay. That'll be the next, you know, I'll talk for a week. But I will
let's
can I just add one little bit about
sure.
So I have a father who's still living. He's 94, and he's quite extraordinary, and he's quite opinionated, and he's made his life in Washington in and around law and politics and government. So he has a very different brain than mine, right? This is what focus, I'm an artist and I don't really even have a brain. I think from my guts, right? He actually thinks from here to here. Anyway, the point is that, of course, every time I publish a book, I've given him a copy and he rarely says anything but thank you. And with the art of dumpster diving, he writes to me and he said, Jennifer, this is an important book. This is a book people need to read to understand white poverty, right? Sort of the people who largely, right, white rural poverty and what's the word? Not disenchantment, unemployment and the various ills that have beset white rural communities. That then largely voted in 2016 and 2000 for Trump. Like this is my Southern version. This is one family. I wasn't thinking about making him representative of anything, but my father being a much more political creature than I am, he went right there. Like this is everyone needs to read. The politicians needs to read it so they can get it. I'm like, Dad.
Well, I would agree with your dad. I think he's right on with that. Before we shift out of YA a little bit, can you tell me the book of Joshua, which deals with mental illness, is sometimes talked about in young adult literature, but on the side. And I could think of, I could give people 10 titles that I think are really good, but we often find it uncomfortable as teachers to use those kinds of books and give them to kids. But so how did that book come about? And maybe from your experiences again with working with AIDS patients, you had an insight to other kinds of mental illness again.
Yeah, that didn't come from Baton Rouge. And again, as you know, the book of Joshua is much more from my own class background. Joshua is a Jewish kid. He lives in the suburbs of New Jersey. He has nice parents. Everybody's married. Everyone has a job. He has a nice roof over head. He has a pain in the ass little brother. So these are not a traumatic setup, but he has a significant psychotic break. And the book opens when he's waking up in the hospital, missing one eye, and does not know what happened, and he can't put his own memory, his own history together. And the rest of the book is how, going forward, he reclaims himself as a human being, his center, and his own history. So that's right. You know that. You read it.
Yeah. It's a great health. So it's a great summary. Yeah.
So for mental health, though, Joshua is based extremely loosely on a boyfriend I had one summer when I was 16. So this would have been 1996. I was in a summer program in Massachusetts and I met this boy and his name was Danny. And we were 16-year-old sweethearts. And then we kept up through college because our campuses were both on the East Coast. And he just had a thing for me. Like he didn't stalk me, but it was a little stalky. It wasn't scary. It was a teeny bit stalky. It was uncomfortable. I didn't have the maturity to say, look, you're a great guy, but I'm not interested. I will never be interested. I just didn't have the maturity to say that. I didn't even know myself. And I remember my sisters and my college roommates saying, Jennifer, he's so cute. He's so handsome. He's crazy about you. He goes to Princeton, right? Like, what's wrong with you? I just wasn't interested in this fellow romantically. Anyway, years and years later, and we all grew up, and he moved back to LA where he was from, and I married my husband, and life went on, and I lost touch with him. But years later, my mother called me and said, terrible, terrible news. He had put out his own eye. He suffered from terrible mental illness. Yeah. And he put out his eye. And in the real story of Danny, my late friend, who was a lovely man who just suffered, I can't even imagine how much he suffered with his mental illness. He did end up killing himself at the age of, he was in his early 30s. I can't remember. Yeah. 33, 36 maybe. Obviously he didn't really kill himself. Mental illness killed him.
Yeah.
But that's the backstory on the Book of
I'm
Joshua.
the source
I
of that.
took it,
I think,
I took it in a very different. I let Danny, have a future. The real Danny didn't have a future.
Yeah, I often gauge a book, a YA book, when I first start reading it, in how long I can read it before I have to get up and do something else. So when I'm reading the Book of Joshua, I think, oh, I was there with Joshua. I wanted to know, how does this come about, right? So it's a really a compelling read is a good way I would say it. So I think that I can't recommend, and I've recommended these books over and over again when I've taught young adult literature classes. And I think that's one of the things we're, as academics who get the opportunity to teach young adult literature or push the kids, we're often book pushers. We have the list of the books we push and push. And if we're going to push something, I think books is a pretty good way to go.
Get a bad book habit. Get it early. Don't let go of that habit.
That's right. It's a great habit.
Right.
Well, the other strand I wanted to let people know a little bit about, and we don't have to talk about this long because people that are interested could be, can go to your website and look at your art. But and I think you're finding yourself as an artist is partly responsible because of your daughter. Is that
no?
No. So, yeah. How did that come about? How did you decide you were an artist?
So it's I'll just tell you the story. So I was living in Baton Rouge. I'm in my early 40s, and I have 3 kids, and my twins at that time were 7 or 8. And my daughter, that's so funny. This is my daughter, right, calling you right now. That is hilarious. And I was working in St. Anthony's, the AIDS hospice, and I was volunteering there. And they, every now and again, the women who worked there, they weren't registered nurses, they were the health aides, right? But they really ran the place. There was also, oh my goodness, there was also a social worker who was sort of the, who ran the office. But the women, the health aides, were sort of the people who really did the heavy work, the real work. A lot of it was just loving. It was just loving these patients. And every now and again, it was, this is in the deep South. This was this was the African American gospel church, right? And every now and again, they would wheel everybody into the front room and have what they called church. And one of the nurses would bring her electric piano, and they would sing gospel. And it was very, very beautiful. And quite a few of, some of these voices were gorgeous, and it was very moving. And I would just sit there kind of moved and tearing up. And so one day, one of the nurses said, "Jennifer, why aren't you joining us?" And I told them the truth. First of all, I told them I was Jewish, but that had nothing to do with, they didn't know what Jewish meant. They just, like they were, one of them once said, "You mean you're not white?" I'm like, that's a good question, but that's not it. So it didn't matter. It wasn't at all because I wasn't Jew, I'm not Christian. It's because I believe, Jesus is just one of the many names for God. Like, we have nicknames for God, and like, I don't care what you call God. I'm down with all of it. And it's because I can't sing. I just don't have the pipes. So they said, "Well, would you like us to pray over you to give you a voice?" This is a true story. And I said, "Absolutely." Like, well, why the heck not? If Jesus gives me a voice, I'm down with that. I have no problem with this. Jesus was a Jew, might be a cousin, you never know. So for several weeks after that, they actually did laying the hands on me, praying. And I would go home and sing the shower. And I was absolutely sure Jesus was going to grant me a voice. And then one day, it was a weekend, and I mean, a singing voice. I have a voice. Yeah. And then one day, my daughter was bored. It was Saturday morning, whatever, Sunday morning. Said, "Mommy, put out the art stuff. You have, when your kids are little, you have your little art collection, supplies." Yeah. I put them out in the kitchen table, set her all up. She painted the single flower and then went across the street to play with her best friend, Emma. And as I'm cleaning up, I'm thinking, no, I kind of feel like I want to paint something. And I painted my first painting. And it was kind of a gospel-y scene. It was in, in this sort of outsider artist, gospel painty, Louisiana style. And after that, I couldn't stop painting. And so I attribute that breakthrough, because it was like an emotional, spiritual, artistic breakthrough, directly to hands-on praying, that some kind of energy was loosened in me that was in there already. And what came out was the paintings. Now, I will say that as a child, I had been a child artist, so painting was not new to me. It was just something that had gone underground for decades, because by the time I hit high school, I decided it was much more important to be an intellectual. And also, art classes in high school got serious. Like, they were really good, really good student artists, and I just wasn't, like, I wasn't one of them. I didn't want all that technique and all that discipline. And I was intimidated by those classes in high school. Those kids were really, way beyond anything I ever had. So that part of my, my package of impulses sort of dropped out of my life, and then it came roaring back in my early 40s.
Well,
and it's just, to this day, when I paint, it's because an image has come to me. An image just comes to me, and I'm like, okay, if an image is coming to me with that kind of, force of saying, paint me, I'm going to paint it. So that's how that happened.
It's a fascinating story, and I would add, I think they probably did give you a voice. It's just not the voice they anticipated, right?
Right. No. I think it's just, you're asking God to let me sing, and God's like, okay, you want to sing? You're just going to be singing in paints.
Yeah.
I'm not going to quarrel with that.
Yeah, it's a great story, and we'll insert in here some pauses and put some of your pictures and put them some at the end as well, so people can see those. Well, and the last turn of a conversation is what I call you as an essayist, because we don't know each other well, but I sometimes see you on Facebook and other things, and then I find you've written these kind of remarkable pieces that end up in a newspaper or on your blog, and so I would say it's safe to say you're not shy about sharing your opinion about whatever the topic may be.
Exactly. I have a voice. As I said, I have a voice, right? So I grew up in this incredibly competitive, talky family, right? And I'm the second, and my sister, it's hard to believe, I'm the second out of 4 kids, right? We're all, I mean, I'm a grandma now, so we're not actually children anymore, but because our father is still living, we still think of ourselves as kids.
Yes.
And my sister, it's hard to believe, who was number 1 to my number 2, is even more opinionated than I am. So I think because she had, and she was number 1, so she got there first. She kind of always was first in line with the mouth, I put it that way. I think I was so kind of chastened or intimidated by her, as a kid. And she was a little bit favored the way the number 1 is. I mean, I favored my son, my first child, definitely, until I had a daughter, and then I realized girls are just always better no matter what. But in our case, it was 2 girls. So I kind of, I made a deal with myself when I was young that I'm going to learn how to open my mouth, and people are going to have to, once I'm a grown up, people are going to have to listen to me. So it comes from kind of a deep place, although at the same time, I think it's probably my nature as well.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not like I found a voice that sort of put on or sat. It is the true me.
What topics have you tackled that you're that you think went off well, that got good responses? Do you care, or you just want to get your opinion out there?
Well, all of the above. It's sort of, I've written a lot of op-ed, and over the many years that I've been doing this, and I've written a lot of I started out writing funny mommy pieces. That's how I sort of started in newspapers. When my twins were born, I was living in Washington, and I had done some kind of feature writing for the Washington Post, not the hard report. I'm not a reporter, I'm not a trained journalist at all. I'm not gonna take down Santos with my, heavy hitting reporting or something like that. But I started, I wrote kind of the soft magazine pieces about trendy restaurants and stuff like that. And then I had twins, and I wrote a piece called the 6-Minute Supper. So at the time, there was a very popular New York Times a food writer who wrote something called the 60-Minute Supper, writing about recipes. I can't remember his name. It was very famous, and I was sort of taking off on that. It was a 6-Minute Supper and I wrote this article about the 6-Minute Supper, and I wrote it in recipe form, starting with trip over twin A, right? Reach to twin B and make sure diaper is not full. Grab vodka. Put water on, set oven at 325, and it went on and on. And suddenly that piece went viral. This was sort of before things went viral, but it went viral because it would have been 1993, right? So it was before interwebs. And then I started writing, the Washington Post asked me to write about this stuff, the mommy stuff. And so I wrote funny mommy stuff for the Washington Post. And that's how I started writing for newspapers, because before then I had started, my first job out of school was at Mademoiselle Magazine as an underling. And I did not want to, I was bad in that world. I didn't get it. I wasn't popular. I was just bad at my job. I just didn't get it. I didn't have that sort of slick, meet your husband at the door wearing nothing but gold lame on your nipples. Like, I just couldn't do it. I'm exaggerating, but you're with me. And so when I found my way into this again, I had to have kids and not have a job at all to find my way into other kind of work that came from a deep place in me. That was my start, and then I just kept going wherever it led. Then I find myself in Louisiana, South Louisiana, like, oh my God, and then we have hurricanes. Yeah. So I started writing op-ed about what it's like to be in a hurricane zone, and I must have done 6 or 7 op-ed during and after Katrina for the Washington Post. So by then I was like an expert. That was really fun because I felt super smart, look at me. And it just sort of went on from there. So the essays, and I've done like just a sort of what's called a lot of creative nonfiction. And interestingly, the biggest champion, meaning the place that's published a lot of my creative nonfiction, which is a lot about being Jewish and having, being on a God search and trying to find meaning in life and having family in Israel and so forth. My own son, who now lives in New York, served in the IDF during the last Gaza war, so there's sort of all this other piece of my life and my own quest as a Jew within Judaism and how to make that, really mean something, and to feel it in my heart, not give it lip service, not just sort of do it in a kind of pro forma way. So that found a lot of that work, those essays on those in that world of subjects, found its way into print in, of all places, Notre Dame Magazine.
Wow.
Catholic University. Yeah. And the editor there, just even when he, Kerry Temple was the loveliest man, even when he rejected that work, it was always with, this is beautiful, but it doesn't fit because blah, blah, blah. So like even the rejections were okay there. So I do a lot of that work too. In fact, the last big sort of creative nonfiction essay I wrote is called Talk to Me. And it was published in a magazine called a literary magazine called Image, Journal Doc, Faith, Religion, God, something I don't remember, but I don't have it in front of me. It's probably on my website. It's called Talk to Me, and it's about how I continue 10 years, almost 10 years later, to grapple with the sudden death, the accidental death of my dear friend and our mutual friend, Lisa Oliver, who was really my great champion, my sort of my angel in Baton Rouge. She was my daughter, my friend, my children's favorite aunt. No real relation at all. And that piece was then finally found a home in this literary magazine, which pleased me to no end because it's a wonderful magazine. And but that's when I do that kind of work, which is an op-ed, it's not journalism either. It's kind of neither fish nor fowl.
Yeah.
A lot of my work is neither fish nor fowl. And so I'm always, beyond thrilled when I find an editor who's open to that kind of work, because a lot of my work does not fall neatly into publishing categories, including the books. So like the book of Joshua, is it YA or is it coming of age? It's sort of both.
Yeah.
Sort of
Well,
both.
I think that's what I found after almost 20 years of, hovering around the young adult fiction world is so many of the writers are living double lives. They might be an editor and do bulk of the work as an editor, but they're writing, or they might be teachers and they're teaching full time and then trying to write, or they're like you, they're working in multiple genres.
Right. I mean, I had the luck of having enough children that it didn't make sense to have a nanny, so I could go back to work.
Yeah.
So, so I haven't worked since the first kid was born. And my husband, my husband's been the breadwinner all these years. You're not supposed to say this, but it's true. He just has been. And so, and he is also a writer as a scholar.
Yeah. And that, so I find that, fascinating that you're in these multiple worlds, carving out a space that I think is really recognizable in all three. I think you've done things that are of vast interest, but you remind me of other fine folks carving their way. Joyce Carol Oates manages to write a couple of young adult novels, and they're pretty good.
Right. I haven't read them, but I mean, I think that's what kind of the human endeavor is to carve a path for ourselves that is who we are, the path we're supposed to be on. Like that's sort of that's it.
And it might take us a few,
not somebody else's.
Yeah. And it might take us a few fits and starts to find them, right?
Well, it does. Of course it does. That's part of growing up.
Yeah.
And as I said, I started out life at a women's magazine. And all my friends, like my mother was so like, oh my God, you're going to be editor-in-chief in 10 years. Like, I don't think so.
Yeah. Something about this isn't quite working out the way I imagined it to be, right?
I love the clothes. Like I love the clothes and the true story. Do you remember the movie version of The Devil Wears Prada? You might right.
Yeah, so, I do.
Yeah,
I thought of that immediately when you said that.
Total chick lit, right? So very entertaining. The movie version had Meryl Streep as the Anna Winter, the editor of Vogue magazine, and absolutely gorgeous. I can't remember her name. Extraordinarily beautiful, young, not so young anymore, actress. It'll come to me as the assistant. Anyway, so I took my daughter Rose, who was then about 13, and her best friend Anna Catherine Collada to see that movie in Baton Rouge at one of the multiplexes.
Yeah.
And we laughed, we enjoyed it, of course. And coming out of the movie, I said to the girls, I said, I worked there. That was my first job, not at that, at Unexplained. Mademoiselle was, 4 stories, whatever it was, under Vogue. The movie's based on Vogue magazine, but it was the same elevator bank. I went up the elevators with that stuff, and Mademoiselle wasn't Vogue. It wasn't. I imagine not as cutthroat and nasty and pressured, but anyway. So I'm telling the story that was my first job. I was there. And Anna Catherine, my daughter's friend, looks at me and says, Miss Jennifer, you are so funny with your jokes. The way you said it, I almost believed you. Because she's looking me up and down and wearing a t-shirt and jeans or whatever. Like I hadn't had my nails done in 30 years. And she just didn't believe me. She just simply
that's really funny that sometimes that when you tell those kinds of stories, that have been part of your life, but not part of your children's life, and you make this big reveal, right? And they might believe you, but their friends are looking at you like, what?
Just like I was nobody's idea, especially in the Deep South, of the fashion place.
Yeah.
I didn't color my hair, on and on. And anyway, but she, I'll never forget that. It was just I still just fall out laughing when I think about it.
That's really
the devil,
really
Anna Catherine, Moses Fernand gathered. It was a devil.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's been so great to talk with you, and I hope that our friends in the YA world will look you up again, and we'll leave some resources here, and I hope to keep in touch, and we'll find out how things go, and
absolutely.
I look forward to that next contribution that shows up.
I got out my YA guts. I got to get that moving again because it's such a great form. It's a
fantastic form, and you've got some good contributions to the genre and to the classification as a whole. So, especially if people are making a list of books about poverty, The Art of Dumpster Diving should be there. And I think when you're talking about things of mental illness, the Book of Joshua is equal to most of the ones I've read in that genre. So I think you've carved something that would be important. But again, as we all know in the publishing world, not every book that deserves an audience finds that audience, right? And that's one of the goals of,
like the story of my life.
Right. But that's one of the goals of these interviews and of the blog, is to try to catalog and archive some things that are worth looking at over time, and hopefully some teacher will say, I need an idea to work, and be plowing through the blog and find this as we go forward.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time and attention. It's been wonderful to chat with you.
Thank you so much, really. I'll say Shabbat Shalom, even though it's not your Shabbat quite yet.
Yeah, right.